It was just an old woman on a broken bike, shivering in the cold. Mechanic Jake Miller saw her crying by the roadside and offered help. His boss screamed, "She is not a paying customer. Get back to work." Jake fixed her bike anyway. Hours later, he was fired. The next morning, his sleepy neighborhood froze in shock. 7 all-black luxury SUVs turned into his driveway, engines silent, windows tinted. Every neighbor watched, then one door opened and everything changed forever. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. Jake Miller had grease on his hands, sweat on his brow, and 1,000 worries pounding through his head. He had been working double shifts at Miller's Auto Service in the small town of Brook Haven just to keep his lights on and buy medicine for his mother. His boots were worn out. His paycheck was barely enough for rent. But Jake never complained. He believed in doing good, even when the world felt like it had forgotten him. That morning, the cold had crept in early. The wind was sharp and frost coated the windows of the garage. Jake had just begun changing the oil on a pickup truck when he saw her, an elderly woman on a rusted bike, bundled in an old wool coat, struggling to pedal across the icy street. A moment later, the front wheel of her bike caught on a crack and she fell hard onto the sidewalk. Tools still in hand, Jake rushed out without thinking twice. She was shivering, her gray hair spilling out of her hat, eyes wide with pain and embarrassment. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Jake asked gently, helping her up. Her hands were scraped and the chain on her bike had popped off completely. She whispered, "I just needed to get to the pharmacy. My legs are not what they used to be." Jake nodded. "Let me fix this for you. You should not be riding alone in this cold." He guided her inside the shop where it was warm, handed her a cup of coffee from the employee pot, and began working on the bike near the back of the shop. That was when the voice thundered through the garage. "What do you think you are doing, Miller?" It was Ron Dorsey, the shop owner. Tall, red-faced, always chewing a toothpick like he was born angry. He looked at the woman with disgust, then at Jake. "You are wasting time on a piece of junk and a customer who is not even paying." Jake stood up slowly. She fell outside. Her bike was broken. "She is just trying to get to the pharmacy." "I do not care," Ron bellowed. "You want to play hero? Do it on your own time. We run a business here, not a charity. Get her out." Jake looked at the old woman, then back at Ron. "I already fixed the chain. She is leaving in a second. You are fired." Ron snapped, pointing toward the door. "Grab your things and go." Jake froze. He could feel every mechanic in the room staring. No one said a word. The old woman opened her mouth, but Jake just shook his head. "Thank you for the coffee," she whispered, "and for your kindness." Jake walked out with her. No job, no backup plan, but still he did not regret it. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when a low rumble echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Jake, still in his robe, stepped outside, rubbing his eyes. 7 all-black luxury SUVs turned the corner and began lining up in front of his house. The engines purred, sleek and expensive. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A dog barked. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. One of the SUV doors slowly opened, and a man in a black suit stepped out, looked at Jake, and said 6 words that would change everything forever. Jake stood frozen on his porch, the morning air colder than ever. But it was not the weather that made his skin tingle. It was the presence of 7 black SUVs, silent, spotless, intimidating, lined up like a fleet of shadows in front of his modest house. Then, from the lead vehicle, A tall man in a black suit stepped out. His shoes shine like mirrors, and his expression was unreadable. He adjusted his tie, walked up the driveway, and locked eyes with Jake. Without hesitation, he said 6 words that sent chills down Jake's spine. "Mr. Miller, she would like to see you." Before Jake could respond, the back door of the lead SUV opened. Out stepped the same elderly woman he had helped just a day before. But this time, she looked like someone else entirely. Her coat was no longer worn and tattered. It was tailored, sleek, and expensive. A gold brooch sparkled on her collar. Her posture was strong, her stride graceful, and the air around her shifted. She was not just an old woman anymore. She was someone powerful. Jake blinked, unsure if he was dreaming. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said, smiling warmly. "May I come in for a moment?" Jake opened the door speechless. His living room was small and cluttered, but she did not seem to mind. She sat calmly on the couch while her security detail waited outside. Jake's hands trembled as he offered her tea. She declined politely. Then she reached into her bag and placed a thick file on the table. "I never told you who I was," she said softly. "My name is Eleanor Whitmore. You may know the last name from Whitmore Technologies. We manufacture defense systems, satellite parts, and high-grade alloys for the aerospace industry." Jake blinked. He had heard that name before on the news and magazines. Whitmore Technologies was one of the top 5 defense contractors in the country. "I was in disguise yesterday," she continued, "testing something very specific. I have spent the last 3 months visiting random businesses across the country, dressed plainly, carrying no ID. I wanted to see how people treated me when they believed I had nothing to offer them. You, Jake, passed a test no one else has passed. You helped me without expecting anything. You were kind, respectful, and you risked your job to fix my bike. For that, I am here to change your life." Jake sat down, still in his robe, stunned. Eleanor opened the file. Inside were documents, official, stamped and signed. "I am offering you a position as head of mechanical operations in our new research facility, 6-figure salary, full benefits, relocation package if you choose to move, and a personal workshop built to your specifications." Jake's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I do not even have a college degree." I know," she said firmly. "That is what makes your skills more impressive. Talent like yours is rare. Integrity like yours is even rarer." Jake was still trying to breathe normally when she stood up and walked toward the door. "You have 24 hours to decide," she said, "but something tells me you already have." The SUVs waited like guardians as she stepped back outside, leaving Jake stunned and speechless. His phone buzzed. Dozens of messages from neighbors asking what had just happened. One even sent a photo of the SUV convoy. Jake looked out the window. For the first time in years, his world did not feel so heavy, but he had no idea. The biggest surprise was still coming. Jake barely slept that night. His thoughts spiraled through every word Eleanor Whitmore had said, every moment that led to her visit, and every unbelievable detail of the offer she had laid on his kitchen table. He had reread the documents a dozen times, each time more stunned than the last. A head position, a 6-figure salary, a fully equipped personal workshop. None of it made sense. And yet it was all real. He could feel it in the weight of the papers, the texture of the envelope, the silent confidence in Eleanor's voice. But what truly shook him was not the money. It was the way she had looked at him. Like he mattered, like someone had finally seen beyond the grease on his hands and the dust on his boots. Jake had spent years fixing engines in the back of a forgotten shop, while people like his boss Mitch treated him like a disposable tool. But Eleanor had walked into his life and in less than 24 hours flipped his entire reality upside down. At sunrise, Jake walked into the shop one last time, not as a fired mechanic, but as a man with a choice. He picked up his old wrench, stared at the workbench where he had poured years of sweat and silent frustration, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he packed his few tools into a small red bag and left. He had no plan to go back, not after the way Mitch had humiliated him, shouting in front of the entire crew, acting as if Jake's decency was a problem. He did not need Mitch's garage anymore. As he reached home, a black car, different from the SUVs, was already parked outside. A sharply dressed woman stepped out. Her eyes were hidden behind designer sunglasses, but her stride was brisk and purposeful. "Mr. Miller," she said with a polite smile. "I am Jessica Lane, personal assistant to Ms. Whitmore. She has asked me to help facilitate your onboarding process. I will take care of logistics, paperwork, and relocation if you decide to accept the offer." Jake hesitated, still overwhelmed. "I have never worked in a corporate setting before." Jessica replied smoothly, "That is exactly why Ms. Whitmore believes you belong with us. She is not hiring a resume. She is hiring a person." Jessica then handed him a second envelope. "This is a sign-on bonus check. Miss Whitmore asked that you open it only if you say yes." Jake looked at it, heart pounding. Jessica continued, "If you are ready, I will drive you to the facility so you can see what your future might look like." Jake took a deep breath, then nodded. "Yes, let's go." The ride was quiet, but every mile peeled away a layer of disbelief. When they arrived, Jake stared out the window in awe. The research center was massive, futuristic, and gleaming under the morning sun. Glass walls, solar panels, and engineers walking briskly with purpose. This was not just a job. This was a world he had never known. Inside, Eleanor was waiting. She greeted him like an old friend. "Welcome, Jake. You made the right choice." She led him through the facility. Labs, design bays, robotic arms assembling custom parts, a testing garage with machines he had only seen in documentaries. Then she opened a private door. "This is your workshop," she said. Jake stepped in and his breath caught. It was every mechanic's dream come true. Polished floors, brand new tools, diagnostic systems, and space to build, create, invent. He turned to Eleanor, speechless. "Talent deserves the right environment," she said softly. "You fixed an old woman's bike like it was a priceless engine. That told me everything I needed to know." But as Jake looked around, one thing still tugged at him. Something Eleanor had not yet revealed. Why him? Why now? And how deep did this opportunity really go? Eleanor turned before walking out. "Tomorrow you will understand everything. You were not chosen by chance." The next morning, Jake arrived at the research facility earlier than expected. He stood outside the building for a moment, staring up at the gleaming architecture, still unsure if all this was real or just a dream he had not yet woken up from. The doors opened without a sound, and he walked in, his boots echoing against the polished floor, as if every step he took carried the weight of something bigger than himself. Jessica greeted him at the front desk. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Ms. Whitmore is expecting you upstairs." He followed her through a long hallway filled with framed photographs of inventions, awards, and newspaper clippings. But one image caught his eye. It was a faded photograph of a much younger Eleanor standing beside a man who looked familiar. Worn hands, piercing eyes, the same proud posture Jake saw in the mirror every day. He leaned in closer. Jessica paused. "You recognize him, do you not?" Jake nodded slowly. That is my grandfather, Thomas Miller. Jessica smiled. That photograph was taken 42 years ago. He mentored Ms. Whitmore when she was just a teenager. Jake stood still, stunned. His grandfather never talked much about his past. He had raised Jake after his parents passed away, teaching him the value of honesty, hard work, and humility, but never once mentioned mentoring a future billionaire. Jessica continued walking. You were not chosen randomly. Your skill may have brought you to her attention, but your name sealed it. When Jake entered Eleanor's office, she was standing beside a large window overlooking the facility. She turned with a gentle smile. Your grandfather saved my life, Jakey. Not with money, not with power, but with kindness when I had nothing. Jake listened in silence. I was a 16-year-old girl who had just lost her parents. I was alone, broke, and had nowhere to go. I wandered into a junkyard crying, and your grandfather found me. He gave me food. He gave me a place to sleep. But more than that, he gave me belief. He told me I had something special in my hands, that if I learned how to build, I could change the world. Jake's eyes burned. The man who raised him had never asked for recognition. He just did what was right. Eleanor continued. When I built this company, I made a promise. One day, if I found someone with his hands, his heart, and his eyes, I would repay him. She walked toward a cabinet and pulled out a dusty red toolbox. She placed it on the table between them. He gave me this. I kept it all these years. It belongs to you now. Jake opened the box, his hands trembling. Inside were tools he recognized from childhood. Wrenches, screwdrivers, an old flashlight with his initials carved into the handle. He felt the weight of memory flood his chest. I was never able to thank him, Eleanor whispered. But through you, I can. Jake looked up. You already have, she smiled. Your journey here is only beginning. There is something else I want to show you. They walked down to a secure lower level of the facility. The halls here were quieter, darker. Security doors scanned their faces before unlocking. Finally, Eleanor stopped at a thick steel door and entered a code. It opened with a hiss. Inside was a massive vehicle unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Sleek, aerodynamic, glowing with a soft blue light. It looked like a prototype pulled straight from the future. Jake stepped forward, mesmerized. What is this? Eleanor replied softly. This is Project Horizon. Your grandfather helped sketch the first concept of this vehicle. It was his dream to create a machine that could run forever. Clean energy, zero emissions, self-healing materials. We shelved it decades ago because the technology did not exist, but now it does. Jake turned to her, heart pounding. You want me to build this? No, Eleanor said with a smile. I want you to lead it. The moment Jake accepted the challenge, a surge of determination rushed through his veins. He was no longer just a mechanic who fixed bikes in a small town. He was the keeper of a legacy that could transform the future. Every tool in that lab whispered stories of persistence and hope. Every blueprint held the dreams of a man who refused to give up, even when the world doubted him. Eleanor's presence was steady and reassuring. She believed in him with an intensity that made him believe in himself. You will not be alone, she promised. I will stand by you. Together, we will bring Project Horizon to life. Jakey's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the first tool. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the pride swelling in his chest. This was his chance to rewrite the story that began long before him. The memories of his grandfather, the struggles of his own journey, and the unexpected kindness of that elderly woman who had once changed his fate, all converged into this moment. Days turned into nights as Jake worked tirelessly, piecing together the vehicle with care and precision. He encountered obstacles that seemed impossible, but he remembered the lessons from his grandfather: patience, honesty, and unwavering belief. Every setback fueled his resolve rather than dimming it. The project became his heartbeat, a rhythm of hope and courage. Word began to spread quietly about the young mechanic in the revolutionary vehicle he was building. People who had once doubted him now watched with curiosity and admiration. Jake's transformation was not just about his skills, but about the strength that kindness and belief could build. Then came the day when the vehicle was ready for its first test. The entire team gathered in the lab, holding their breath as Jake ignited the engine. The vehicle hummed to life, a smooth and powerful sound that filled the room with promise. It moved forward, steady and sure, as if carrying the hopes of generations. Tears welled in Jake's eyes. This was not just a machine. It was a symbol of every kind act, every chance taken, and every dream that refused to die. He knew this was only the beginning. The real journey was ahead, but he was ready. Elena smiled proudly. "You have honored your grandfather's legacy and made it your own. The world will never be the same." Jake looked out at the horizon, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. He had been fired, judged, and overlooked. Yet here he stood on the brink of changing everything. The kindness he showed that day, the faith Eleanor placed in him, and the strength he found within himself had led him to this moment. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jake was certain of one thing. He would never stop fighting, never stop believing, and never stop proving that true power lies in kindness, courage, and the will to rise. The days that followed the successful test of Project Horizon felt like a whirlwind. News outlets began to take notice. Jake, once a struggling mechanic, was now the center of attention in a story that touched hearts across the country. People wanted to know more about the young man who had dared to dream beyond his circumstances, who had been fired but refused to give up. His story became a beacon of hope, proof that kindness and perseverance could break every barrier. Jake's phone would not stop ringing. Investors, engineers, and journalists reached out, eager to support the next phase of his work. Yet Jake remained grounded. He remembered the humble days in his grandfather's workshop, the small acts of kindness that had shaped his journey. He knew that success was not just about machines or money. It was about lifting others and never forgetting where he came from. One afternoon, as he prepared to address a crowd at a major technology conference, Eleanor approached him. "This is your moment," she said softly. "You have inspired more people than you realize." Jake took a deep breath, stepping onto the stage. The lights were bright. The crowd was large, but his focus was sharp. He spoke with honesty and passion, sharing the story of the old lady's broken bike, the unjust firing, and the relentless pursuit of a dream. Every word was met with applause. Every sentence filled with the raw truth of his journey. As the conference ended, a man in a tailored suit approached Jake. He introduced himself as Marcus Reynolds, CEO of a global clean energy company. "Your vision aligns perfectly with ours," Marcus said. "We want to help bring Project Horizon to every city in America." Jake's heart swelled. The unexpected kindness he had once shown an elderly woman had set off a chain of events that transformed not only his life, but the lives of many. The luxury SUVs that had arrived at his home were not just symbols of success. They were the result of courage, belief, and the power of one good deed. That evening, Jake stood outside watching the sunset paint the sky with colors of hope. He knew the road ahead would have challenges, but he was ready. He was no longer the mechanic who fixed bikes in silence. He was a man who had turned kindness into strength, who had hacked the impossible, and who would inspire generations to come. The journey had only just begun, but Jake was certain of one thing. True greatness was born from the courage to rise after every fall and the willingness to help others rise with